Here's the thing. This week is National Apprenticeship Week 2021. Will apprenticeships ever be seen as equal to a university degree? They should be. It's interesting. It seeks, of course, to highlight the work being done by employers and apprenticeships across the UK. The Apprenticeships Minister, Gillian Keegan, said of the event, National Apprenticeship Week is a great opportunity to highlight the amazing opportunities to an apprenticeship that an apprenticeship brings to employers, individuals and the economy. It's been fantastic to see how many employers of all sizes have gone above and beyond to ensure apprenticeships can continue their studies during this unprecedented time. Despite the impact of the pandemic on employment rates, of course, new research shows that a quarter of trade companies are planning on hiring new apprentices in 2021. Now, there was a study on this. It's interesting that apprenticeships, still like electricians, 28%, most likely trade. These are most likely trades to be looking for apprentices. Building, 34%. Painters and decorators, landscapers, 15%, and 5% respectively. What has happened to advice for kids in the last 20 years? I would say it's almost criminal. We've been in this territory before about the lack of encouragement for school leavers to go to university. Depending on what era you grew up in will depend on the kind of story you can tell. But in a way that sort of makes it so much worse. When I was at school, I've said this many, many times, there was literally no emphasis in the mid to late 80s, no emphasis at all at our school of going to university. It simply did not exist. It was not a thing. It was not a discussion. We didn't know anybody that went. Nobody mulled it over really as an option. I look back at that era. I still really, I honestly do not know why that was just removed. Whether certain elements of the state sector just thought, well, these aren't the kids that go to university. So that was bad for another reason, okay? Because there was no sense that you might have some really bright kids there. I'm sure over at the private schools they were having a very different kind of conversation, but certainly there was nothing. And even, members of my peer group outside of school who went to other schools, again, I can't really think of anyone from that era that went to university. And then, of course, it all changed over the course of the next couple of decades. And then we got to Blairism and education. We'll be speaking to the son of Mr. Blair, Euan Blair, because interestingly, he works in apprenticeships now. Almost the antitheses of what the old man was saying all those years ago about getting more people into university. And the sense that I think most of us have got is that the emphasis in schools on university has been at the expense of kids being able to pursue or encouraged to pursue other kind of skills. And have a listen to some of these statistics about the amount of people who used to do apprenticeships compared to now. So over the it's a rough estimate, some of these figures, okay, because we're going back a little bit here, but a rough estimate would say that there were over 350,000 apprenticeships in any year in the early 1900s, and that continued. Every year you got the same amounts of people, sometimes hitting nearly 500,000, right the way through both world wars. By the 1960s, a third of boys were leaving school to become apprentices. A third of boys left school and they went on an apprenticeship. I remember lots of that around the family. My cousin, I think, one became a builder, one became a mechanic. His dad was a builder, so he got an apprenticeship with him. Some kid went to college and then went on to an apprenticeship as a mechanic. Hairdressing seemed to be a big one. Oh, you heard about Julie's girl? Yeah, got an apprenticeship. Really? Yeah, over there at Happy Scissors. Serious? Wow. Big deal. Good old Julie. So what has happened here? By the 1990s, the number of apprentices had dropped. Bearing in mind, we're talking about 350,000 every year from the 1900s right the way through the wars up until the 60s, when you had a third of boys leaving school doing apprenticeships. By 1990, the number of apprentices had dropped to just 53,000. It did get a little better. 2018, 2019, it went up to 742,000 people participating in apprenticeships. But the following year, it dropped again to 275,900 apprenticeship starts. These are the starts, okay. So you can see where we're at on this. And the point, I think, overall, with it being National Apprenticeship Week, is just the lack. It's an educational abuse not to show kids that option. And one of the problems is, of course, that schools, as I can see it, and if you're a teacher or you've recently left school, you've got an understanding of how that system works, maybe you can tell me. But as far as I can boil this one down, schools would rather sell the university path because it's much better for their Ofsted. It's much better to say, we send 80% of our kids to university, rather than 80% of our kids became hairdressers or bricklayers. And I think that kudos is kind of the box they are desperate to tick. It's outrageous, frankly, that you don't say to kids who aren't necessarily academically bright. And remember, by the way, just to counter my point about university when I was at school, slightly, one of the reasons for that was because the best of the best, the absolute creme de la creme of the academic world went to university. You had to have that certain something. If you were less bright than Stephen Fry, you had no chance of going. That was certainly the perception of university. And it was there really just to kind of work on the brain boxes of our world that had specific skills, academically speaking, that should be correctly exploited for the use of, in the world of medicine, law, engineering, whatever it happened to be, science, etc. But for the rest of us, that emphasis could be elsewhere. And today we sit in this kind of no man's land of apprenticeships where some still happen, and it's great that we have this week where we look at this, but still too many kids don't even get the opportunity. It's almost seen as a second-class citizen territory. This is second best, right? If you're really good, you can go to university, but if not, you can do an apprenticeship. Yeah, it's that. And that stinks to high heavens, frankly, because there's a lot of bright kids who either don't want to go to university, or perhaps more fundamentally, university would just be the wrong place to go. And if you want to get into engineering or mechanics or some other skill or trade, then it might just be that university isn't the best place. And what's happened now, just to make this so much worse, is that employers are kind of using university as a sieving process. They're not much bothered about where you went or what you studied or even what your grade was. But when you send that application in for a job, you've been to university, therefore you're in that pile. You didn't go to university, so you're in that pile. Now, what kind of system is that? What kind of apartheid is that going on with the future of young people? 0344 499 1000. So I want to speak to you if you swerved the conventions of a university path and decided it wasn't for you, and how did that pan out for you? What was the upshot of what happened there? But more fundamentally, if you made an amazing success out of not going to university, it was never lost on me that I didn't go to university. It was never discussed, as I said. But actually, while mates, I suppose, or contemporaries that I might not have even known then were studying this thing, I was kind of working in it. So there's that. So by the time, media students, there are more media students leave their course, complete their course every year than there are total jobs in the media collectively. That's how crowded it is. So if you've got a kid in radio, you don't meet anybody now in radio that didn't go to university, really. But getting in there, doing some work experience and living and breathing this world while your mate's doing a media degree course, and some of them are pretty good, by the way, I have to say. There's some incredible media courses. I know they're much maligned, but there are some pretty good ones out there. But the chances of getting a job are incredibly slim afterwards. But you could be doing it while your mate's learning it. What's the better skill set to have? 0344 499 1000. Will apprenticeships ever be seen as equal to a university degree? I sense they take a poor back seat to degrees, just by dint of the name degree. There's something that we sort of celebrate over that. Largely depends on where you went, what course you did, and what you got, of course. And at the end of it, and I haven't even mentioned the £50,000 debt. I've done all of that with no mention of the £50,000 debt. 0344 499 1000. Your story, your path. Did you swerve it? What happened when you did? And from the educational side, those that work in that field, why still the lack of emphasis on telling kids that a good apprenticeship, following their dream in a skills-based area, is just as noble and helpful and useful and game-changing as going to university. But will apprenticeships ever be seen as equal to a university degree? In a moment, Toby Perkins, the Labour MP, Shadow Minister for Apprenticeships. First, Euan Blair, CEO of Multiverse, a London-based company offering young people alternatives to university. Euan, good to have you on again with us, sir. Nice to speak. National Apprenticeship Week.
Yeah, good to be on again, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. Pretty crucial, isn't it, National Apprenticeship Week? I mean, even just the name of it, the title, the fact we're talking about it is just perhaps a nice way again to encourage people and remind people there are other ways than the standard conventional university path after leaving school.
It absolutely is, and it's just great that there's a real spotlight shone on apprenticeships at this time of year. And of course, look, it shouldn't just be confined to 1 week. But, you know, so many of the comments you've had on this and lots of the people who've been talking about this subject, apprenticeships are quite clearly now seen as a genuine route into some of the very best jobs.
Yeah.
The challenge we've got, though, is it's still not being talked about enough in schools. There's still not enough awareness among parents about it, that when they do find out about it, inevitably they think this is a really great thing. And we do need to do more to drive that message home, because there are very, very few jobs that you cannot do now where you need to go to university.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because there was a period where we thought, you know, if you didn't go to university, then anything other than the path to university was seen as kind of second best almost.
Yeah, that's right, particularly in tech and professional services, which makes no sense because actually, most people who've gone to university go into jobs like I did that are completely unrelated to their field of study.
Yes.
I did an ancient history degree and ended up in investment banking. I cannot say that knowing how to quote Thucydides did me any good when structuring a derivative.
There's a few old gits work in that profession, though, aren't there? That deserve a history muse, if nothing else. In terms of that message at school, Euan, I mean, you're absolutely right on this. I mean, there is a sense, and I can't qualify this, that, you know, for some schools, selling university to their students is part and parcel, you know, because they want the school to shine. They want their Ofsted report to say we sent 90% of our kids onto further education.
Yeah, there is absolutely a problem in that. And it also links back to league tables and the fact that at the moment, the emphasis is almost entirely on proportion of students who've gone to a Russell Group university or any university. And that's not the right way to be goaling schools. And I think that's something that we're hopeful the government will look at more closely. I think the other thing is, though, a lot of it's just down to awareness. And given nearly every teacher, in fact, pretty much every teacher at the moment has been to university and that's the route they know and understand, they're not always confident in talking about the alternatives. And so we spent a lot of time going out to schools and having our apprentices go to schools and talk to teachers, parents and other students. They really understand how you find an apprenticeship, how you weigh up the pros and cons, how you evaluate it. And invariably, when they have the information, they do then become pretty ardent supporters of it, because there's a clear acceptance that it is no longer you have to go to university or you can't get the kind of job you want. Apprenticeships really do fulfill that now.
Do you sense, I mean, there was a period, it seemed, a couple of years ago, then we were seeing more people go for apprenticeships, and that number was, I mean, the heady days, which we were talking about earlier, when, you know, you had hundreds of thousands every year, you know, from 1900 who went into apprenticeships. That kind of changed, but it did seem to come back a bit a few years ago, although I sense it's perhaps still needs work in progress would be the way to look at this.
Yeah, it is a work in progress. And I think particularly because if you look at, you know, just how the economy's changed over the past 20 years, Britain is largely a tech and professional services economy. Those, you know, most people are going into office jobs, and there was an assumption you had to go to university in order to do one of those jobs. There are, 500,000 people, slightly more in fact, doing apprenticeships at the moment this year. And the fastest growing area of apprenticeships is in tech and data.
Yep.
And so we're seeing that expand massively. It's also one of the areas that's been best insulated from the pandemic, because these issues have become more and more important. Every company is in the grip of trying to figure out how to handle the challenge of digital transformation. And so they are desperate for people with skills that they need in those areas, and they cannot get them through university. I think it's a recent employer survey that said employers feel that only a fifth of graduates they meet have anything like the requisite skills they need for their jobs.
That's interesting. And I guess there's another point, Euan, just to finish on. We also have going to university used almost as a kind of sieving process for future employers, that for employers who look at an application and they're not necessarily bothered about where you went or what you studied, but the fact you went to university is enough to get you the first interview, perhaps. And that seemed a little unfair to quite a lot of people.
It's completely unfair. It's also completely bogus. And the smart employers have rapidly moved on from that. And you've seen a lot of high-profile companies drop degree requirements. There is no correlation whatsoever between academic performance and job performance. So using that as some sort of benchmark of, is this person going to be good at or well-suited to this job because they got a 2-1 from a certain type of university, is completely meaningless. And the stuff that does matter, things like intent, motivation, conscientiousness, interpersonal skills, grit, resilience, those are not being evidenced by a degree. So we spend a lot of time talking to employers about other ways of measuring those things that they actually care about, because they use the degree as a sort of proxy and pre-filter, as you said.
Yeah.
But now they're pretty aware of the fact that actually doesn't work.
Yes, some of us could have told them that to start with, of course. Listen, Euan, great to speak. Thank you. Euan Blair, CEO of Multiverse. They're a London-based company offering young people alternatives to university. Let's speak to Toby Perkins, Labour MP, Shadow Minister for Apprenticeships and Lifelong Learning. Nice to have you with us, Toby. I mean,
Hi there. Good afternoon, Ian.
It's National Apprenticeship Week, and I was mentioning at the beginning of the programme, yonks ago, this country sent hundreds of thousands of kids into apprenticeships. That sort of went a little bit old hat, and suddenly the emphasis was on university. Is that going to change again, do you think? Are you sensing there's a change in that kind of choice field that kids have?
I think that there's sort of a lot of positive language about apprenticeships. I think you were right to say that it felt a few years ago that we were maybe moving more down the path of recognising the value of apprenticeships more. First, Gordon Brown was a big believer in apprenticeships, and I think then the start of the Conservative government also saw a big focus on apprenticeships. I think that since the introduction of the apprenticeship levy, and government reducing a lot of their own contribution, what's happened is apprenticeships now are very much in the shape of major employers. And I think there's not as much of a focus on the needs of small businesses. And I think in our economy, certainly in towns like Chesterfield, there aren't huge numbers of employers, the old employers that had 5,000 people walking in the gate on a Monday morning. You have got hundreds of companies that employ 15 or 20 people.
Yeah.
And so apprenticeships have got to stay with the reality of what we are currently. And that's where I think government may be getting it wrong.
Yeah, I guess the whole landscape has changed, hasn't it? The days that, if you worked in certain areas, you left school, it was a default position that you worked in the factory, you went down the pit, you did whatever the standard thing, often just the legacy of your own family dictated, and you might get an apprenticeship along that. But I guess a lot of those kind of big industries, which I think you're alluding to there, Toby, have sort of gone. So it's a slightly more, it's not as easy as just saying let's have more apprenticeships, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think what we need is for government, firstly, to make sure the funding is there for people who are taking on apprenticeships. And we've made this proposal coming out of coronavirus that there should be a subsidy for wages for apprentices to recognise the fact that the 330 million was sent back by the Department for Education from the skills budget unspent last year because of unspent apprenticeship levy. Yeah. So that's one thing that we think should be done. But it is also about making sure there's further education colleges, independent training providers that are there properly funded to be able to support those small businesses with the bureaucracy to get in and make sure they can take advantage of these opportunities, as well as the BAEs, the Airbuses, the Toyotas and those other major companies are obviously an important part too.
Has there been too much of an emphasis on university over the years? I mean, when I went to school and leaving sort of in the late 80s, I remember, there was no real discussion, living in a working class area of going to university. Your former leader, Tony Blair, of course, and we just spoke to his son, Euan, about exactly this, had a better emphasis on it. And I can kind of see what he was trying to do in the sense that, why didn't people like me from those backgrounds have that opportunity? But now it's kind of there's a sense that, we've been too focused on sending too many kids to university. Was that a mistake by the then Labour government?
I don't think it was a mistake to recognise that in a modern economy, everyone needs to be trained, educated. The roles for people without any skills are becoming less and less. I think that where the mistake has been made, without particularly pointing fingers, is having enough of a plan for those who don't go to university, or to say that not going to university is a secondary route.
Yeah.
I think what we need is to offer both. Yes, there should be university places for those able to do so, who want to do so. But it shouldn't be a case of the cream of the crop go to university, and anyone who goes down the apprenticeship route or vocational route is secondary.
Yeah.
I think we need opportunities for people who want to have vocational opportunities to choose that. And there's many people that I meet that have started off with an apprenticeship, that have actually used the apprenticeship as a route into university, and maybe come out 5 or 6 years down the line with a university degree, with 5 years experience under the belt, and frankly, as a parent of a 22-year-old without 80 grand's worth of debt.
Yeah, that's always handy, isn't it? Toby, listen, great to have you on. Thank you. Toby Perkins, who's the Shadow Minister for Apprenticeships, with us here on Talk Radio. It's that parity that I want to see. I want to see an equivalence between a kid that says, I want to do an apprenticeship, and a kid that goes to university. But at the moment, there's a pecking order, right? And one takes a rather uncomfortable second place to the other. That's where we shouldn't be. On apprenticeships as a viable alternative to further education. But will they ever be seen as equal to a university degree? Anne Milton is former Apprenticeships and Skills Minister from 2017 to 2019. Anne, good to have you on with us. I mean, this was I would imagine, a kind of never-ending conversation. Did anybody ever solve this conundrum over there at the department at the time when trying to sort of balance, yes, we want kids to go to university and follow academic brilliance if that's their thing, but also we want to be able to show that there is another route for kids who can't do that or don't want to do that?
Nobody solved the conundrum. And I heard you say earlier, Ian, that it's about kids deciding what's the right thing for them. So it's not an either or, it's just about lifting the prestige of apprenticeships.
Yeah, and I think that's the right word, isn't it? The prestige of apprenticeships, which has sort of taken a back seat, really.
That's right. I think the reforms that we brought in 2017 weren't perfect, but it was a good start. And if you think of some of the degree apprenticeships that are running, and that the apprentices I met say at places like Airbus, I mean, those were prestigious degree apprenticeships.
Sure.
And to some extent, being able to do a degree apprenticeship, I think, has started. It's a long way to go, but it's started to lift the prestige, to realise that you can go into a company, do a level two apprenticeship, the equivalent of a GCSE, and then end up doing a degree apprenticeship is fantastic. But it's a long, slow burn. And although we talk about the choices that young people make, the people that we have to persuade are their parents, who are very influential on the decisions that they make about what to do when they leave school, and teachers.
Do you think schools, and we've talked about this a little already, have too much of an emphasis on university, and in the sense that there is certainly a perception that schools quite like the idea of being able to say, look at us, we're a great school because we sent 85-90% of our kids to university, whereas the same boast about apprenticeships doesn't seem to carry the same educational kudos. There's a problem there, right?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And you do hear schools say exactly that. And they say it because they think that's what parents want to hear.
Of course.
And the kids that they send on to apprenticeships, it's always a bit of an afterthought. It's 80% of our kids get into university. And of course, we do send someone to some very good apprenticeships, but it's an afterthought.
Yeah.
And I guess that the thing that we have to change in young people's minds and their parents is that going to university when you're paying for your tuition fees and you rack up debt, as Toby was talking about, this is an investment decision. Where are you going to get the best return for your money? And that is sometimes in an apprenticeship. It's quite hard work because you're doing a job and learning at the same time, but you might get better value for money from doing one.
Yeah.
And I guess if you were going to use one thing that might change people's minds, it would be that.
What's the difference, if there is a difference, Anne? And this may sound like a fairly route one question, and forgive me if this is a stupid question, but is there a difference between doing what would be called an official apprenticeship or just being taken on as a trainee by a company?
Well, if you do an official apprenticeship, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Can I just say, if you do it with a company and the company is probably paying for your training, or you do an official apprenticeship, you have got some safeguards.
Yeah.
So an apprenticeship, particularly at the lower levels, at level 2 or at level 3, then, it's got to last for the minimum of a year. You get a qualification, if you like, at the end of it. You will have completed an apprenticeship standard. So you've got a bit of currency that you can trade with other companies. If you want to change jobs, you could say, I've completed a level 4 apprenticeship in this, that, or the other. A person that doesn't do that, taken on as a trainee, can say, I've got 5 years with X company, and that might well be as good a passport, but it won't have quite the same currency, probably.
Yeah. I mean, you were a nurse before politics, right? So, I mean, back in the day, when I say back in the day, I'm not talking about Florence Nightingale's days, of course, but back in previous decades, getting a job as a nurse would have been something that you got, and you turned up for your interview, you were taken on, you were trained on the job, as it were, and you became a lifelong nurse. My auntie did that. That would be impossible today, right?
No, it wouldn't be impossible. And it was really back in the day. And I was an apprentice. We weren't called apprentices. We were called student nurses.
Yeah.
But it was an apprenticeship in every shape and form. Blocks of training, practical experience on the ward. You had people working with you. And one of the things I'm most proud of, because my roots are as a nurse, is to reintroduce nurse apprenticeships. So we do have nurse apprenticeships, I think from level 2 right up to level 7. So you can become a registered nurse, and you can become a nurse assistant as an apprentice now. Listen,
Anne, it's always good to speak. Thank you. Anne Milton, former Apprenticeships and Skills Minister, former Conservative MP. You've heard a couple of different sides of this argument. I think there's a common agreement here, isn't there, between the Labour MP, Anne there, who's a former Minister and Conservative MP, Euan Blair, who's the son of a Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, in that the emphasis is just way too focused still on universities. And it makes me angry, because it makes me angry of when I think of kids leaving school who have a dream and have an idea and have a path, and particularly the neck of the woods I live in. I mean, the obsession of going to grammar school and university is just through the roof. I mean, it's as funny as it is ugly in that respect, but the emphasis is absolutely vast. And you just think, what if you don't want to do that? What if you don't want to do that? What if you just want to do a different job? And whether it's an official apprenticeship or whether there's a company that just wants to take you on and say, okay, well, the wage isn't great to start with. We'll take you on. We'll train you up. What if you leave school and want to be a bricklayer? What the heck was ever wrong with being a bricklayer? My uncle was a bricklayer. I thought it was the most amazing job. My dad was a painter. But I never told my dad this, but I always thought my Uncle Charlie, I thought he's definitely got the better gig here. He had a hod in the garden. Good Lord. Let's speak to a couple of people who've gone this route. Let's speak to Islam Fessi first. He turned down an offer to study law at Durham to pursue an apprenticeship in business at UNICEF. Islam, afternoon to you. Now, I'm sure Durham is a very nice place and law is a very worthy degree. What was the process that made you think, do you know what, this could be a good few years, but I'm not going to do it?
Great question. I think that my desire to not go to university and turn down that offer was purely stemmed from the fact that, I've been working in my borough since the age of 15. So I've been working very closely with police and young people to enhance community safety. So I think that idea of, practical learning and hands-on learning was something that stuck with me. Whereas, I know that university is a great route. I think that with the skills that I was looking to pick up, I think that an apprenticeship was perfect for that.
But you'd have done law And that would have been, that right now you could be sitting in a posh penthouse. You might be in a posh penthouse. I don't know. You could be sitting on a good 6-figured salary if you got the right gig after a law degree. I know that's tough. There's a lot of lawyers out there.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. I think for me, it was more so going with my gut feeling. And I think that, as much as I've mentioned that, the idea of going to Durham and studying law and, going through a 3-year undergrad degree, bearing in mind law is something that, always changes. So the law has to be studied constantly.
Yeah.
So I think that was kind of the idea that kind of maybe put me off this in the slightest bit. But also the idea of debt. I think that's something that we don't discuss nowadays. I think the idea of going to university and being in a large amount of debt, whereas having these qualifications. But I think also employers nowadays are looking for skills, are looking for what differentiates you as the candidate. And I think that having an apprenticeship will allow me to pick up those skills and, build up my professional development.
We've also, you're right about the debt. I mean, we've kind of, it's so now ingrained in the vocabulary, isn't it? £50,000 debt. We don't tend to focus on it very much. I mean, 50,000 quid, it's a lot of money to be in debt with no guarantee that you're going to find yourself in a job that's going to pay it back. You went to work for UNICEF. I know you've got your own personal reasons that you wanted to kind of work in this sector. Did you sense then that a degree would kind of just essentially put off what you knew you wanted to do deep down?
Not really, because I think that, as I said, it was more so kind of, I think I got to the point where I was more flexible with the route and more so kind of what it was that I was doing. I think that the idea of having long-term vision is great. I know that, I've always wanted to pursue law and, the idea of being a lawyer always kind of satisfied what I wanted to do. But I also had to think about currently, what is it that, society is looking for? And I think that that's what shaped my decision.
Yeah.
Equally saying that, though, I think that despite being in the, different career path, I think that professional development and that experience will shape me, in a great kind of position in years to come.
I've no doubt about that. What did your parents say when you said, I'm not going to university? Because, some parents are okay with it. Others are a bit disturbed.
That's a great question. They're actually watching live, and we had this conversation just a few minutes ago. And I think for them, the idea of going to university was something that was so fixed on. And I think the reason why that is because for them, they've not had the greatest education. So in order, for them, it was almost as if I was the one that had to kind of complete that. But I think also I had to, when I had that conversation, it was explaining to them, what is it that, what is it now that's changed? What's the shift? I think that if we look at a couple of years ago, or even decades ago, university is what, is what everyone was looking for, essentially.
Sure.
I think now, as I said, we've moved into a path where apprenticeships are becoming more kind of sought for. There is a higher demand for apprentices and apprenticeships.
Yeah, that's a great thing to hear as well. Listen, Islam, thank you for sharing that with us. I think it sounds like a great choice you made, sir. And thank you for being on with us. Turned down law degree at Durham, is now apprenticeship in business at UNICEF. Good on him as well. Verity, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
Good. So you did go to university. You got a fabulous degree in French and politics. So right now you should be running half the world with that degree. But you decided you wanted to do an apprenticeship as a software engineer. What the heck happened?
I know, right? And lots of people talk to me and do say that it seems like a bizarre choice. However, for me, it felt like the right thing. So I, as you say, went to university, did my French and politics degree, found that I really enjoyed tech policy and I really enjoyed the ins and the outs of technology. Came out of university, founded my own academic research institute around cybersecurity.
Wow.
And very much looked into the academic side, and I wanted to diversify the conversation around technology, and discovered this massive skill gap in terms of the number of women in technology and the number of women who have engineering skills.
Yeah. And
so I wanted to retrain, go back, start again, and take up an apprenticeship in software engineering so that I could be, the cliche is the change you want to see in the world, but so that I could be in that conversation.
Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody not that long ago about exactly this. And, if you spot a woman in the software engineering department, you win a prize in some place. I mean, it's breathtakingly rare. How? Yeah. Why?
Why is it so rare, or how did I get involved?
Well, no, why? How is it that this has been an area that hasn't been followed up by more? Well, this is largely a separate conversation, but you might be changing the face of things here, and obviously there are others, but it's still an area that isn't followed up by anywhere near as many women as men.
Yeah, I think it is previously in the past has been a very male-dominated industry, especially because subjects like engineering, there's a perception that men are more suitable for these roles. And there's a perception, for example, in job adverts, if you're a man and you feel like you don't tick off every single qualification on the list of your job advertisement, you're more likely to go for that role than a woman would. And so this is changing, and we're seeing there are a number of different initiatives, even with Sky, who I work for. There's Get into Tech initiatives, trying to get people starting right from the ground up, training from different backgrounds. But it's going to take time. If it is traditionally a male-dominated industry, going into a room full of male engineers is always going to be a little bit intimidating. So it's not until we can start getting our voice heard and getting that training and those qualifications, like I have been able to do with my apprenticeship, that can start to change.
It's kind of the word engineer in itself, I guess. You conjure up a certain image of that, don't you? But just a brief point, because we are short on time, Verity. How is the apprenticeship going? What would you say to others listening to this about pursuing an apprenticeship, whether they do it post-university or whether they do it straight out of school?
Yeah, I think we've touched a lot on the stigmas around apprenticeships and the fact that they're not deemed as being equal to university, and I think that's definitely changing. I think that one of the reasons why students often want to go to university is for the social aspects, and that's changing a lot. I think that, for example, with Multiverse, we spoke to Euan Blair, but my apprenticeship provider, they're creating a community around it that allows you to do all the extracurricular things that you would have done at university. Like, I've been organising events, I've been doing pay negotiation training. There's so many things that you can do as part of your 20% off the job hours, which allow you to have that networking, sociable experience at the same time as they're being in a really impressive company like Sky with experts in the field. Learning from that on-job experience has really elevated my knowledge around software engineering. So I'm just finished it last week, but I've really, really enjoyed my apprenticeship.
Fantastic. And good luck with everything. And thank you for speaking with us, Verity. Appreciate your time. Verity Marsterson graduated in French and politics, but then went on to do an apprenticeship at Sky as a software engineer.